Hilton McClelland.
Hi, Rochelle McClelland.
So this is the only video I think are doing together.
Ironically,
Yeah.
we are the owners and
This is our group.
of
Of
Roots Counseling,
Roots Counseling, all of that.
and boom, here we are, just one time. Get it while you can.
But we kind of looked at all of the topics, and we really felt like this was the one that we should teach together, personally because of our life story.
You just should.
The one that would best fit us sharing because of our life story and because of the things that we've had to grow and what's kind of pushed us towards
how we have utilized the skill
over the years
effectively and not always effectively.
Sure, we'll probably show some of our ineffective times as well. So this is radical acceptance. If we were writing DBT, we would actually put radical acceptance right next to mindfulness, as far as like
it would be part of your orientation,
Yeah.
mindfulness skills, like understanding this skill as you go throughout the rest of the skills of DBT, we find to be super important. And I don't know that we always teach it that way. I think sometimes we have.
Yeah.
We really need to make the habit of doing that.
Yeah, well, good news. So we can put this video wherever we want, and we can also
sure, video-wise.
Yeah, it's good. So look
But
at
in our groups that we're in day out.
Yeah, we definitely need to make this more of a
we should totally do that.
So there's our shoulds. So all right, let's jump in. So I'm going to share my screen real quick because we start off with a metaphor of radical acceptance, and that is probably the equation we go to the most in our DBT groups that we do with all of our clients. Is let's first take a look at what radical acceptance is. So I've got the handout 11 pulled up. We're going to be going through handout 11, 11A a little bit. 11B, we're not going to cover as much, but it's a
They're
good.
just really cool steps,
Yeah.
and we encourage you to follow them after you've learned the basics of the skills. But we're not going to cover those steps
In the video.
So.
Our worksheets 8 and 8A and 8B are just different ways of tracking radical acceptance, and the same thing with worksheet 9 and 9A. And then we're going to also cover turning the mind a little bit today. This is kind of one of our favorites. I mean, they go hand in hand with radical acceptance. So we feel like they're better taught together. So let me go. Sorry if I'm making you sick. Just close your eyes for a second. All right. So what is radical acceptance? So let's start with this definition right here. Radical acceptance means all the way, complete and total. It is an accepting in your mind, your heart, and your body. It is when you stop fighting reality, and that's the key. I'm going to actually highlight that word. So when we stop fighting reality, stop throwing tantrum because reality is not the way you want it.
Are all of you familiar with the adult tantrums? I love them. I think they're very entertaining to watch. I see them pretty often with clients.
We do.
And
we do them.
No, I don't.
No, in this process of filming, we've had a
few tantrums.
Individual tantrums of our own.
Stressors come.
Let's just say the schedule hasn't worked out exactly the way we planned it to be. But that doesn't necessarily give you what is radical acceptance. That kind of tells you how to do it, and the whys of it. What has to be accepted, and this is the part where it gets really hard. Reality as it is, and I'm going to go back to my highlighter or my red pen. Reality as it is, the facts about the past and the present are the facts, even if you don't like them. That's the piece that's really hard, and we'll get into the equation here in a second. There are limitations on the future for everyone, but only realistic limitations need to be accepted. That means that, first off, we don't even know what the future is.
Right.
We haven't actually determined the future, so we're in the present.
Us anxious people want to think we know
that we can control the future, or that the future is imminent because of all the things that have happened to us in the past. And so when we get to the equation, that'll make a lot more sense. Everything has a cause, going back to the assumptions. That's directly tied to assumption number 6, which is that there is a reason or a function for every behavior we do. And that means that there's a function for everyone else's behavior as well. And then life can be worth living even with painful events. So that is what has to be accepted. And let's give it an even deeper meaning. This is the equation that it's a very Buddhist equation. Most of DBT comes from, especially the Eastern philosophical undertones, they all come from the Buddhist traditions. Because the lady who wrote this, Marsha Linehan, became a Buddhist, and that's how she got better with her disorders. And so this equation is the one that gives us more power and everything else. I'm actually going to add to it. Let me change the color so you guys can see what I write with. Change it to white. So pain plus acceptance, this pain plus non-acceptance, this one right here, this is the part that's really hard to accept. What this is saying is non-acceptance means I am choosing not to see reality as it is. I am denying reality as it is.
I'm gonna throw those tantrums.
Yeah, all of those things. I'm gonna, all the shoulds, everyone should act this way, or everyone should see it my way.
That rigid thinking,
yeah.
Black and white, absolutes.
Yeah, the black and white, any of those things, that is what leads to suffering. And so in the Buddhist tradition, suffering is a choice. It's not, and lots of times in English, we equate pain and suffering, to be the same thing. And in this case, they're separating pain as a common factor for everyone.
Pain is life, right? Essentially.
Or life is pain, either way. You will have pain throughout life, and life is painful, but life is also beautiful, and it's all those other things too. It's not just that. So I don't have to suffer just because life has pain. When I choose not to accept what's going on, when I choose not to accept the pain, or when I choose to deny that life is painful, that I should have to suffer, the why me prayers. Like if you believe in a deity, if you've ever like prayed to the deity and been like, why do I have to go through this? That's a non-accepting prayer. And that's a very much suffering prayer. Okay, pain plus acceptance equals learning. And I'm going to add some things to this. It actually equals increased freedom and decreased pain.
Yep, not sunshine and rainbows. Just because we use acceptance does not mean everything's all of a sudden going to be awesome all the time, right? Oh, I've accepted that, because I think that can take you to kind of an oblivious place. If you're like, I've accepted that, there's a thing called over-acceptance.
Right. And so, and we'll get into this with the teeter-totter analogy that Rochelle will go into. This idea that what is increased freedom? Well, increased freedom just means that because I've accepted that painful events happen in life, because I've tied these two things together, I'm no longer in prison to suffering. And therefore, I have more freedom in life. It doesn't mean I'm more free in reality. Viktor Frankl wrote his wonderful book, Man's Search for Meaning, after his experiences at the concentration camps. He didn't write it during, although I'm sure journals and stuff were used.
Sure. But it was that hindsight.
Yeah.
Really built
and he did watch, and he watched the people who were in the concentration camps, the Jews that were in the concentration camps, the ones who had accepted that that's where they were, that they knew this was painful, they didn't like it, and nowhere in acceptance are we telling you to like anything. They didn't like being in the concentration camps, but they had freedom of spirit because they had accepted where they were. Now, some tried to escape, and some did escape, but the vast majority that tried to escape that prison ended up dying. And so therefore, they figured out a way to not accept their pain, and eventually their suffering led to...
Yeah, those who survived were ones that had accepted that that was their situation at the moment, that they couldn't change the situation, but they could change how they approached things in that setting, and didn't mean they agreed with it, didn't mean that they liked it. It just was. That
also means that we've been given a tool for massive freedom because of their experience. That The Man's Search for Meaning, if you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to read it. A very powerful book, because it is all about how we get freedom out of painful events. And then what happens is that becomes less pain. And that less pain is that not pain doesn't go away. It's just that I'm not dwelling on the pain anymore. And so therefore the pain becomes a manageable thing. This equation has become a cornerstone of what we teach. It's not that we're trying to tell people that pain won't happen. In fact, we try to help people lean into their pain, because, and especially in the improved skill, which is what we've gone over earlier in the distress tolerance lessons, in the improved skill, that finding meaning isn't the silver lining. Finding meaning is understanding what the pain is, understanding the learning I'm supposed to get from that experience, or that I choose to get from that experience. That in turn gives me the freedom and decreased pain. That's why it's such a powerful tool. So this part of the equation is where I spend a lot of my time, because when I spend all my time in this part of the equation, and it kind of goes into our story a little bit, when I was suffering was when I was functionally an addict. And I was suffering with everything, all the unfairness of my life, all the things that, didn't work out well for me, all the things that I had blamed everyone else for.
Which I think is why we find that our human nature is to go to those distractions and to those addictions and those things to just escape that pain.
And what it was doing was
more suffering.
Increasing my suffering. I was absolutely in more pain. I was causing everyone else to be in more pain. And in reality, there's still pain from that. We're still working through times that it's not always happy. However, when we lean into the pain, when I support Rochelle when she's going through moments that are hard for her, when she supports me when I'm going through moments that are hard for me, then that pain is decreased and it's in fact shared. And that definitely has led to more freedom in our lives.
Which, we don't often talk a lot about that component with radical acceptance, but I think what this equation is really describing is that ability for everyone involved to make more connections.
Yeah.
Connection is the antidote to addiction and to suffering and to those types of things. And it is requiring,
So
and
we
this
could
is
even
why it
add
scares people.
Increased connections.
Right. This is why it scares people, is because a lot of people are afraid of connection because it means you have to be open and vulnerable. I'm not personally one of those people that struggles with that. What?
She never struggles with vulnerability.
I'm pretty open with my struggle with vulnerability, which is the most open thing I am. That doesn't mean that
She likes it.
Doesn't mean that I do well in actually being more open with that. I'm working on it, but it does allow me to be open with people about how I suck at vulnerability. Yeah.
All right, and so then if we're looking at why accept reality, as we go down the lateral path, or the bottom half of the page, why accept reality? Rejecting reality has never changed it. I didn't become better until I accepted that I had addictions. Changing reality requires first accepting reality, not liking, not approving of, not agreeing with reality. It's about accepting that it is reality, and that not liking actually can be a good thing, and that can be a motivating factor for us to move forward in life. Pain can't be avoided. It's a natural way of signaling that something is wrong. That's the important part of pain. It's your body's way of telling you that something's not right. Like, we're all okay with physical pain when it's supposed to be there, or even when it's not. Well, let me rephrase that.
I would say we live in a world where it's like,
we're not.
What can I take to get rid of this pain?
But we recognize that when we have a pain, that means there's something wrong.
Sure.
Like, we accept that. Like, if we accept that we put our hand on the burning stove and it burns us, we understand that burn is to tell us to stop touching the burning stove.
Right.
If we're playing a sport and we try to move a certain way, and our head wants us to move one way, but our body says no, and we ended up twisting an ankle or breaking a leg or whatever. We've all seen those nasty hits in the NFL or in basketball, where people have broken legs and stuff. That's the body's way of saying something's not right. And that's a very extreme way of saying it. But if we pay attention to I have back pain all the time because I used to weigh 263 pounds, and I carried that extra weight for years, like 20 years. And so I've got back pain because of that. Well, that back pain was there to tell me something was wrong. I just chose not to listen to it for 20 years. I chose not to care that it was there. And now I pay attention to it when I'm working out, and I want to adjust my movement so that I don't hurt my back anymore. Rejecting reality turns pain into suffering. That kind of goes into that equation that we already talked about. Refusing to accept reality can keep you stuck in unhappiness, bitterness, anger, sadness, shame, and painful emotions. And then what that's saying is instead of learning from the negative emotions of life, I'm being stuck in them. I'm actually choosing to sit in them, as opposed to saying they're here to teach me a lesson. And then, of course, acceptance may lead to sadness, but deep calmness usually follows. That just covered up all those words. Deep calmness usually follows. That's now usually is the key word.
Mhm.
There's no promise here. We're not promising a life of bliss, and nowhere in reality sucks. I mean, the world is trying to kill you. Let's just face the facts. Everything in the world is trying to kill you, and we're all going to die. That is a fact, and we don't like that. And we may be extending life all the time. In fact, we're filming this in the middle of the coronavirus scare, which, lots of people, the toilet paper was gone everywhere off the shelves. It was crazy.
Some of us just want to buy toilet paper for a regular.
Right. So some of us just needed toilet paper. And I'm great that people are like storing up and stocking up for things. I think that's a wonderful thing because I think everyone should have a good supply of things. But ultimately,
that
fear-based response is the problem. And so if I accept reality, if I accept the coronavirus is here, I can be calmer in my response to how I handle it. And the path out of hell is through misery. By refusing to accept the misery that is part of climbing out of hell, you fall back into hell. And I love that analogy because, as we get to turning the mind, you'll understand that analogy. So Rochelle's going to go into a little bit of the graphic of the teeter-totter, and she's going to be drawing on our teeter-totter and kind of explaining how this works. So how this balance of acceptance works.
Yeah. So with this analogy, that concept of trying to figure out the balance of acceptance and change. And so we're going to put, I get this is no, this teeter-totter's not going to allow me to balance it. So just use your imagination. But just imagine on one side we have acceptance, and on the other side we have change. So we all know how teeter-totters work, right? We got one person on one side, the other person up, down. Well, if one of these hops off, what ends up happening? Your butt lands in the dirt, right?
It hurts.
Yeah, we've all childhood.
It hurts your tailbone.
Yeah, not comfortable, not fun, don't love it. And so we need to figure out how to balance that. So this is where we talk a little bit about that over acceptance. If we're moving so far over here to acceptance that we're just down in the ground, what do you suppose is happening? We're probably going to end up depressed. So when we get to that place of over acceptance, it can lead to, I guess, one of two things like I was talking about before. You can live in oblivion.
Oblivion's great, right? Ignorance is bliss.
Or if you accept everything and become Eeyore and you're just like,
then everything is miserable.
Oh, everything's horrible, nothing I can do about it.
And it's always going to be that way.
Yeah. It's always going to be this way and nothing I can do to change that, right? Well, we happen to know that there are things we can do to change it because we've got over here our other lovely side of the equation. We've got that change component. However, for change to be possible, we have to first accept. We cannot have change without acceptance. It's not an option. So once
it is an option.
Oh, sure.
It's option 4.
You'll stay miserable.
It's literally the use no skills.
Yeah, use no skills, stay miserable. And so we've got this other side of the balance. But if we're over here and change is all we see, anxious people unite, right? And we just want to change and fix things and all that's happening. What do you think's happening over here? Yeah, anxiety. Yay. We're getting super anxious.
I'm feeling very Mr. Roger right now.
Let me change my sweater. Yeah, we got that anxiety just
I love
going.
how you circular the change in such an anxious way.
Yeah, exactly. See the metaphor? Yeah.
I got it.
I got my downward depression over here and my anxious going on over here. So yeah, we've got anxiety going on. And so we can live in that state of, I've got to change this, I've got to do something, something's got to happen. Well, for any of you who might have tried to change this, something that you haven't already accepted that it is the way it is, and we can move towards that change.
Or it's not changeable.
Right, and there are certain things, and I've actually come to notice a little bit more that we say not changeable, and that's true. There may be some things we have to accept, like wholeheartedly, there's nothing we can do about it. But when we look at our options, our 4 options for solving any problem, one of those is always applicable.
Somewhere.
On the change mode. It just may be that we need to change
our emotions.
our own emotions.
Yeah, change our interpretation of it.
Right. So change is always a factor, I've discovered. It just depends on what we identify as change and what we.
So in one of those changes that I struggle with is sometimes I over accept my attention deficit disorder. And sometimes, yeah, sometimes I say, well, this is just how I'm wired, which is true. It is how I'm wired. I'm 100% on the ADD spectrum. And some days it's really bad, and other days it's great. Other days it's really useful to be able to handle, life coming at you in 1,000 different directions. But I mean, even just last week, I actually turned around and asked Rochelle a question as we were walking down some stairs. And then I asked her the question and I bolted.
It's
and
story of my life.
I don't remember even what the question was. She comes down the stairs and she's angry at me because I bolted. And I had moved on to 3 different tasks. Not just one, I had moved on to 3 other tasks. I was looking at the food we were going to get. I was trying to decide if I wanted a dessert. I was faux in eating lunch mode. And she came down and she's like flabbergasted with me, like, what are you doing? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm getting lunch. That's where I am. And she was, expressed her frustration with me asking a question and then not actually even waiting for me or for her to answer. And my initial response was that change, it's just, well, I mean, I can change, but this is just who I am. So it's kind of over acceptance. But then, I got not even looking at the options of change, but then I just look at all the options of change and never really change the fact that mindfulness is where I need to be. So to get to that balance.
On the other side, for me to accept that this is partially who he is, obviously I'm going to suffer less with it if I accept that.
She won't be as mad at me, which is always a nicer thing.
So it's a balance. As you find even in relationships, I really find that radical acceptance is so applicable to relationships, because those are the things in our life that really create the ebb and flow of your day-to-day functioning. Like there's other situations obviously that go on, but I think our relationships above anything else kind of play a role in that. So ultimately our goal is that we want to get to a balance of acceptance and change. How much do we need to apply towards acceptance? How much do we need to apply towards change? Well, and figuring out.
If you're in AA traditions or anything like that, you've heard the Serenity Prayer 1,000 times, or said it, 1,000,000 times. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's wisdom,
our nice little middle ground right here. This is our place where we can really find that middle path, that wise-minded response to things. So as with everything, wise mind is applicable throughout DBT. We're always coming back to that. We're always coming back to the middle ground. That is the purpose of DBT, is to find that middle ground. Get out of these, gray, black areas, white areas, all or nothing, and come to the gray areas a little bit more.
Cool. All right, so how do we do that? And I think the next skill, so let me close this and we're going to go to our next. You can.
Thank you.
So now we're going to go to the turning the mind, which is really the fork in the road. And so if you skip over to handout, sorry if I'm making a mistake again, skip over to handout 12. This is the turning the mind skill. And Rochelle's going to cover this one. And I'm going to pull up her little thing so she can sketch out anything that she wants to.
So yeah, this concept is, as it describes, just like a fork in the road. So as we see the visual here, as we're traveling along down our lovely little life, we're going to come to a lot of forks in the road, right? Especially when it's a hard decision. So we find ourselves, this is us.
Black? I guess
no, just black would blend in.
Yeah.
I could do something brighter, like yellow, I suppose. But I don't know. Anyway, we're traveling down this little road, and some situations where, so we apply this 100% to radical acceptance, where you're going to, you have to accept reality over and over and over again. It's not as simple to say, oh, I've radically accepted that.
Yeah.
It's all good. Every time Milt has an ADD moment, I have to re-accept that over and over and over.
And I give her ample opportunities.
So great. So great. So it's not as though I can just say, I've accepted this once and I'm done.
And just so we're clear, she has her issues too.
No, we're good.
Right.
Oh, that might be one of my issues.
Yeah. So
Um,
I get to radically accept all the time too. It's not just her.
so the idea of turning the mind is actually choosing to move towards acceptance. So we've got over here down this road, we've got our acceptance road. Oh, see, that yellow doesn't show up well there. Anyway, you get the point, right? We've got our acceptance road, and then we've got our rejecting reality road over here. My handwriting is awesome in this. So we have to over and over and over again turn our mind to move towards that acceptance road. Even if we come down this road of rejecting reality for a little bit and we're recognizing that we're suffering and that we're struggling, guess what? You can turn back around, come back to this fork, and make that decision to move towards acceptance again, and find ways to work towards that. So, as it says on the handout, the choice to accept does not itself equal acceptance. It just puts you on the path. And so we recognize that we're on that acceptance path, and just much like our rejecting reality path, we can be on that acceptance path and then be like, oh, this is too hard. And we come back and we're like, I'm going to go over there. Right?
The sound effect is the best.
You're welcome. Because this really happens, I think, if you observe, step back and observe your day in, day out life. This happens probably with a lot of things where we spend a lot of time on that rejecting reality road. And I think the biggest part is to be mindful of that, start to recognize and to make little shifts, not feel like we have to do that 100% and like, oh, I've accepted and now I'm just 100% on this road and here's my sunshine over here. Woo, yay. Sunshine and rainbows, right?
Yeah.
Because we've accepted, we're good.
Right.
Yeah, so don't expect that. That's not the goal.
And
what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, I use a little bit of a different analogy because I always hate the backtracking analogy of this one. And so, because I'm one that doesn't ever move back, which is probably part of my problem.
Describe that for me. What do you mean you do not move back?
I like to just move forward all the time. And that's because I focus on forward. And so what has worked for me is this analogy of a straight road. And when I see this analogy, I see this road as the acceptance path. And it's kind of a Taoist philosophy. The Taoists believe that when you're in the Tao, this is when you're in your kind of effective zone. And for me, what happens is I like to walk this way. What was it over there? Then come back. And every once in a while, I'll walk on the path for a bit, and then I'll come back off and U-turn. And then I'll eventually come back and cross the road. In other words, that, just to give you an idea, that crazy path that I walk, it's the U-turns, these parts
and
right there. For some of us. Right. Those are when I turn my mind back to the path. And when I try to stay in the path, I'm more effective. So when I clearly have my values laid out, when I understand the direction I want to go, that shouldn't change for me. I don't change my values and my direction a lot because when I do that, that's when I get lost. And so I tend to live this. And if I can stay like this, really close to the path, then I'm doing okay. When I'm doing this is the problem. And live over here for a while and then come and live over here for a while and then turn back. Then those U-turns are so much more drastic. And so I just try to stay within, every once in a while stepping off the path. But most of the time, I'm moving forward on the path. And that's how I turn my mind, and that's what I'm looking at.
And I think that would be the overall goal to get to that place. I feel like you come back to the fork in the road a lot more times before you get to that ability.
Yeah, the fork is to me just that U-turn moment. And the problem with the fork in the road is I get that the fork can pop up at any time, and I don't know. I can just see me getting lost on the forks in the road. Whereas if I've always got one path I'm heading towards, that works better for me.
Sure, and I think taking people where they're at and where they might find themselves, though, they may not have found those values.
No, they may
have not have found that straight path. And so I think it's important to look at which analogy
works
describes
for you.
where you're at. Which one is effective for where you're at the moment? Are you still in this fork in the road? Are you needing to move toward that acceptance path versus the rejection path? Or are you mostly on the path because you have some clear goals in sight, as we discussed in the emotion regulation section when we're trying to identify those values and goals.
Well, and even like like an example for that is when I'm on this road, we can call this the 12 steps. When I'm in my recovery process, I'm really close to the 12 steps. And then when I'm in my heading towards a relapse process, I'm not even looking at the 12 steps. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of one of those paths.
Yeah, you may not even be crossing back over this.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes,
No, sometimes I just am going to live over here and go all over the place. And then eventually I'll head back. Yeah. So that's kind of like when you have an anchoring tradition, an anchoring set of values. And that's, I think, what the difference between what you're describing, what I'm describing is. If you don't know what that tradition is or those values that you're living, then you're going to have to keep making new forks in the road.
For sure.
Or you're going to just come on them a lot.
Yeah. So the other steps that it kind of describes, as it gives you the step-by-steps on the handout, is that observing that I sort of mentioned for a second. Observation is, as you've gone through the mindfulness skills already, hopefully, that is like one of your first steps always. If you can step back and observe anything without judgment and just really see
letting go of your filters,
letting go of all that, that's always going to be your first step. A lot of people come to this place and observe this through the lens of nothing's ever going to be better. Why me?
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be this way. And so we can really go into that rejection place easily. So we really need to use our mindfulness, what and how skills to apply to this for sure. And then it really goes to that making the inner commitment. Nothing in our lives, there's no motivation that can happen. Nothing we can actually move towards change if we don't have an inner commitment.
Well, and you can change out this term, accepting reality, to moving back towards your values, to being a better person, whatever that phrase is, that because sometimes accepting reality is the phrase that's really hard.
Right. Yeah. People, I have numerous clients who hate the term "it is what it is." Milt actually has that in his office.
I do.
I find it highly effective to just be like, it is what it is. Now what? What am I going to do with this?
Well, yeah. You still have to be careful with that.
Sure.
Because I've got plenty of clients who, they'll believe wholeheartedly in it is what it is, over accepting. It's kind of this funny mix. Like my super anxious clients will say it is what it is, but then what they'll do is they'll still function in this change mode and not actually show that they live in is what it is. Or you've got the super depressed clients that it's just always going to be this way. There's never going to be any difference.
Right. Yes, we've got to be aware of that. And then number 3
this is the hard
my absolute favorite, however, is because you have to, like I was describing with that fork in the road, you may have to come back and do that over and over and over again to really move towards acceptance. And that's where a lot of people get stuck because they're like, I'm so tired of accepting this. I'm so tired of trying to live towards this. But I think going back to that idea of our values.
Have I clearly described that it's over and over and over?
I think that if we go back to that idea of our values, that can be an easier way to look at it. You can kind of be like, oh, okay, I'm not trying to just like hard, fast accept reality as it is. I'm trying to move towards my values and seeing this is not effective for me. I need to move towards what's going to be effective to meet my goals and values and those types of things. So I think that can be super duper helpful.
Well, yeah, and that last one, develop a plan. This may include other people. And in fact, most of the time, I think it does include other people because we're not always the best at seeing where we don't accept reality. Yeah. And we've had great talks of, heck, I had a moment just a couple of weeks ago where I was, describing something to her and she's like, you realize you're just not accepting this and this part about reality. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. I'm not. And it was so obvious, but yet it wasn't. Mm-hmm. And I've had those same conversations where, I've helped her get to that realization too.
Sure.
And obviously the more you invest in the relationship, the more the willingness to hear that plan can be heard.
So it's kind of like all the skills of DBT go together and like
all
intertwine.
The time.
Weird.
It's almost exhausting.
Yeah. So figuring out that plan, developing that plan for how to think ahead with that a little bit, but not live in the future. So it's that balance again.
Yeah, I mean, so we just hit our 20-year anniversary, and it's so funny what we accept now versus what we accepted early on in marriage. And I don't think either one of us were really good at this skill at first.
Oh yeah.
And now we have the extra added bonus of her mom lives in our basement, and so we get to accept more reality all the time because we're, you know, constantly in a fluctuating situation of having another person in our house. And you know, our two kids are getting older. You know, our daughter's a sophomore right now, and our son has got one more year of middle school. And you know, that's another reality to accept. And you know, how many parents get stuck in that? You know, my kids are getting older. I hate it.
Yeah, so you get miserable in the
Yeah.
moment, you know, of that instead of enjoying.
And miss out on all the opportunities, or you know, or you're so caught up in your life that you're not accepting the reality that they are getting older and you're missing out on things. In other words, this plays in so many different directions, and there's so many different ways to apply this. So it's a really important skill, and it's really a lifelong skill. It's not something you master over a short amount of time. And I wouldn't,
little by little.
I wouldn't even say that we're at all masters of this skill yet.
For sure not. And I do love looking back and seeing the progress with this skill and how that's our understanding of it is increased, as well as our usage of it and the way we apply it.
Yeah.
Has definitely made a lot of difference for sure.
So we use the teeter-totter all the time. We use it when we're angry at each other. That's the best.
With throw skills around.
I don't think you're accepting reality right now. So we've got lots of room to grow with this skill still. But I think this and mindfulness, those two skills together, have probably been the most life-changing pieces for us.
And for a lot of our clients, we see that connection, that light bulb.
So
change opportunity.
Hopefully you got something out of this video. We enjoyed teaching it. This is one of our favorite things to teach together because we get to find our faults.
Yay.
and that's kind of the point is, you know, we're in the trenches with you guys. We're not here because we haven't used these skills. We use them all the time, and we can't.
And I think, like I mentioned in the previous video, that is the point of DBT is we are facilitators, not, you know, lecturers.
So previous video is funny because it could be a later video too.
You know,
depending on where we filmed it. Yeah. So, all right. Well, we hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and we hope you appreciated the time we got to spend with you. We're always happy to get to teach together most of the time. So, thanks, guys.